Hey everyone, welcome to the Mid-Market Webinar Series. These happen every first Thursday of the month, so please watch for future sessions and please make plans to attend. My name is Mark Newhall, and I'm happy to be here. I have some great hosts and speakers today. Steve Kennison and Ace Lopez. They're going to give a great session today. Very excited that they're able to make it. New attendees to the Mid-Market Tech Talks get a very cool stainless steel IBM mug. So if you're new, please watch for an email about getting your mug. If you have any questions during the session, please put them in the Q&A session of the webinar, and we'll be sure to get to those at the end. And that kind of wraps up what I had to say. I hope that you've got your munchies ready for the big show. And Steve, if you are ready, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Mark, and happy being an alum on the Tech Tuesday talks, or Tech Tuesday, the weekly or monthly talks here. So it's great. Thanks for having me back. So I am joined with my colleague Ace Lopez. My name is Steve Kenniston. I am the business development executive for the IBM Spectrum Storage software portfolio. So basically, storage software, anything Spectrum, I kind of work with. And I'm here with Ace. Ace, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm not an alumni, but I'm really happy to be here for a first timer. My name is Ace Lopez. I manage the America's tape business that includes Latin America, North America, and Canada. So real happy to be here, and a great topic. Whoever selected this topic has a lot of foresight.
And I have to tell everyone, Ace and I have presented a lot together, and true genius and great speaker when it comes to discussing tape. So let's jump right in. Ace, for many years we've heard people say tape is dead, right? That seems to be the first thing that gets conjured up. Every single tape gets brought up and talked about, right? But in the Q3 earnings for IBM, we heard that tape was mentioned as really a shining example of growth for the portfolio. In addition, things like hyperscalers were mentioned, which I think probably play a big part of that growth. In addition, I meet with a lot of customers that basically tell me, yeah, we're moving away from tape. We don't really care about tape. They have things like recovery time and recovery point objectives that are very small. So they feel just writing to disk, they've got this notion around operational recovery. But are we seeing a renaissance going on in the tape business, or how do you kind of talk to that high level first?
Yeah, well, first high level, I mean, yeah, there are some drivers of what we like to refer to as the tape renaissance, right? Of course, the biggest one that's almost in the news every day is ransomware. Everybody wants to make sure they protect their data. And I have a colleague, it's not just the big companies. I have a colleague whose father is like 80 years old, and he got attacked by ransomware and they hijacked his family photos. So he had to pay a ransom just to get his family photos. Now, you don't read about those in the news, but everybody's concerned, right? You could be just small or really big. So ransomware, number one, ransomware, and people are looking for a way to protect. But also data has changed dramatically. People, the files used to be microfiche or images or documents, but now they're video. I mean, everyone with a smartphone can be their own director and producer of a movie. So that's a lot of data generated by, everyday folks like you and me. Also, because data is becoming so big, people want a way to store a large volume of data in a small amount of space. And so it's important in this age, of massive data growth and strict compliance regulations, be they corporate or government, that people have a way to do that. And then tape gives an optimal performance for short-term backup and restore performance with cost-effective long-term data retention. So at a high level on the Renaissance, it's really about some key points. One is low-cost storage, the true air gap, sustainable IT growth, hyperscale adoption, and a long roadmap, so a 10+ year roadmap. As aerial density, capacity growth, and another one that is becoming more interesting is portable media. And that is a feature that people don't often think about. And of course, the durability and reliability. Now, I would like to address the tape is dead because, as our development team likes to say, we just celebrated 68 years of tape and 67 years of tape is dead. And so by that timing, you can guess who started the rumor. It was IBM disk engineers who invented disk 1 year after others invented tape. And so the IBM disk engineers go, well, we don't need tape. We just need disk from now on. They couldn't foresee what would happen, about 10 years ago. So anyway, it became fashionable to bash tape and call it dead. And, I used to call it dead when I worked for a company that didn't sell tape. So there might have been a period of time around the turn of the century when, did I just say turn of the century? Man,
We are old, huh?
I feel old now. But anyway, there was a time when tape got a reputation for being a bit cumbersome. You had different formats and you had different companies, and compatibility could have been a problem, but fair enough. But over the last 10 years, tape has gotten a lot of automation, sophistication, the software to manage the data protection, very intelligent. Now tape libraries and the software to manage them are some of the smartest cyber machines and solutions on the planet. So I would say in general, those are the things. Now, hyperscalers, because it was mentioned on the earnings call, and they are the companies that store the world's real big data, right? So what we have found in working with them is they're very selective. They evaluate the technology they're going to use to store their data. They want to know the product has a solid roadmap. It's going to be around for the long haul, and it's got to be affordable. And of course, they want to know the supplier they're betting their business on is going to be around for the long term. And so that's why we're working with a dozen top hyperscalers around the world. And as was stated in the Q3 earnings call, it's making a positive financial impact, not only to the IBM, but to our business partners, because tape is adding great value, not only for our traditional clients, but also for hyperscalers too.
So Ace, let's stick with that just for a second. So it's crystal clear tape is not dead. I mean, hyperscalers are kind of the new thing these days when it comes to IT and IT infrastructure and deploying that sort of thing. And they wouldn't necessarily pick a quote unquote dead technology to move forward. So this is clearly key to them.
Yeah.
But let's take a little bit of a twist on this. For a hyperscaler, typically huge, large environments and that sort of thing. How do we parlay a lot of the capabilities and thinking that the hyperscalers are doing into small to medium business enterprise? I mean, you said a few of them, but let's drill in on those because I think our audience, they're not hyperscalers, right? These folks want to really understand what's in it for me if I choose tape. Why is this a good decision?
Yeah, that's a good question. And here's how I see it. For a long time, I've worked with companies of all sizes. And then over the last few years, we've really put a lot of effort into the hyperscale business. And I would say this general observation, that the difference between hyperscalers and most other businesses is scale. I mean, that it is scale. And scale brings about some challenges, right? But the basic things that hyperscalers need are the basic things that every company needs. So they need low cost, they need a physical air gap, they need security, they need long-term viability. And, any size business can receive those same benefits. And that's why we have an entire range of products and solutions that can not only satisfy hyperscaler demands, which is typically libraries that can store exabytes of data, or medium-sized companies that store several petabytes, or even, well, we even have a single drive desktop that a small business can use to back up their data. So, of course, all that is priced accordingly. So I would say what the hyperscalers have done for our business and for the industry in general is because they're so exacting that at scale, they're able to see, where things can be improved, how optimization can happen. And I think everybody benefits from that. But the basic characteristics of tape are ubiquitous.
I think one of the interesting things I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ace, right, is it takes, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but it takes funding for any vendor to be able to develop, innovate, and build their products. And with all the hyperscalers really, I would say, running to IBM for help with their tape infrastructure, they're taxing what used to be called traditional tape infrastructures and saying, hey, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. And by them buying a lot of tape, we actually have the funding to continue to innovate even better, smarter, stronger, faster. And all of those things always end up, I always see them, they move right down throughout the portfolio. So even the smallest libraries have some of the highest advanced, I like what you said before, they're kind of the most sophisticated robots out there, right?
Exactly. And by the way, sophisticated robots, but not the Terminator type, right? So these are very safe.
I want to drill into a couple things that you said, but let's start with air gapping, right? A lot of times, this is the age of cyber, right? And a lot of times we hear all vendors, especially the ones who don't sell tape, talk about air gapping, and they always throw that word logical air gapping in there. And logical can be, getting it off my network just to the cloud, getting it into object storage, put it on some type of worm. But if you really want that true physical air gap, the definition of air gap, getting a gap of air between the system and where your data sits, you got to pick tape, right?
Yeah, it might be useful to, take a trip back memory lane just for a minute on this. The strongest definition of air gap is that the application has a true physical disconnection from the medium that stores the data. So any medium, storage, compute, or network. In fact, air gap started off in the networking world where the networking guys in the CIA and the NSA and other three-letter acronyms, right? I'm not going to say any more because they're probably listening, but they said, hey, look, we must have an environment that is completely cut off. It's not connected to the whole in order to protect our network. So physically detached from external sources. So, if your network is detached, then your compute and storage will be also. So in the purest definition, a storage air gap means that it's at a level which the storage is completely disconnected from access or application capability. Now, most folks understand inherently an air gap with tape, right? It's air gap by its very nature. And if I had a cartridge, I would hold it up here and say, how can a bad actor get to your data on this if it's in my hand, right? So the portability of the tape cartridge is easy to visualize. I'll give one anecdotal example. I worked with a life sciences company and their research teams, and we were analyzing how they use their data. And researchers in life sciences get a grant, and in that grant, it's usually IT equipment is usually included. And then you can have 10 research grants in a particular company, and they all have their own little IT. So how did they use the air gap? Well, one research manager basically used tape, backed up all the files every night to a cartridge, and then took that cartridge and put it in the trunk of her car for overnight storage. And now that's not the best way to keep those cartridges safe and secure. And so we kind of talked her out of that method for obvious disaster recovery reasons. But she understood the inherent unique portable feature of tape. She should at least store the cartridges at grandma's house, on the other end of the state. But um, that inherent portability, that inherent air gap, is kind of easily understood. You also hear, a virtual air gap or a logical air gap, but even with virtual and logical air gaps, there's still a physical connection. And so, in my view, call me a tape bigot, but in my view, there's always some risk if there isn't that physical air gap. So no bad actor can get to your data sitting on a cartridge in the trunk of your car, I guess, if you prefer, unless they steal your car. So it's preferable to place cartridges in a secure closet with dual authentication, or in an iron mountain, or there are other methods to secure those cartridges, but cartridges give you the clear air gap.
I agree with you, Ace. I mean, I often have conversations with customers talking about this notion around true air gap and the definition and that sort of thing. And while some of these other logical air gaps haven't been penetrated, at least to our knowledge, right? The fact that they are online and the fact that these hackers are getting more and more and more sophisticated, at the end of the day, they're going to figure it out. And my question to the customer is, do you want to be the one that happens to be the one they break and have to report it, thinking I thought it was air gapped enough, right? I mean, that's always the tricky question. So, Ace, I have a question for you, right? Going back to this whole notion around tape is dead and that sort of thing. I think you started to allude to it, but I think we should drill into it because I think people care. What's the long-term viability of tape? How should folks think about, what's coming, what's the future? Is it still, viable? Is it going to be around for even, they say it's dead, but it's going to be around for a longer period of time? I personally think it will be. I think the cost capabilities, the performance capabilities that are coming with it. I visited our team in Switzerland. They are amazing at what they do there. I think there's a lot of upside, but I mean, you're in this every single day, so.
Right, right. No, I think that's a great question. It often leads me to Google, because I say that because almost everything I talk about with clients, it's all online. You can just go Google. And one of the things about the long-term viability of tape technology is the conversation around areal density. Now that sounds like a, techno type of conversation, but actually CFOs love this conversation because they can see visually why tape is a viable technology for them long term. So if you Googled INSIC, INSIC, areal density chart, you'd see why disk capacity growth hit the saturation curve about 8 to 10 years ago. So it's all physics. There's no religion, philosophy, or politics involved about one technology versus the other. It's just that you can cram only so many bits on a disk platter of a fixed geometry, but then at some point the integrity of the bits become compromised because you can only reduce the bits so much or pack them so close together. Now, disk won't go away, but the capacity growth enjoyed by the disk technology before 2012 is not coming back. And disk manufacturers are trying very hard to increase capacity, and I think they'll be successful, but it won't be like it was where, followed Moore's law or Kreider's law, which is Moore's law for disk, where you got twice the capacity every year and a half or so. And they'll try new recording techniques like hammer and mammer, but they'll never get back to the heyday of disk drives. Now, tape does not have that physics issue. And here's what I mean. Think of it this way. If a disk bit, one piece of information, is the length of a Taco Bell burrito, then a comparable tape bit today would be the length of a basketball court. So that's why IBM and Fujifilm demonstrated last year a 580 terabyte cartridge, uncompressed, 580 terabytes. Even with only 2-to-1 compression, that means in the future, with tape, you'll be able to hold 1 petabyte in the palm of your hand. So that's the viability from the technology point of view of tape. Now today, our enterprise tape cartridge, the TS1160, is 20 terabytes. So over the next decade or so, we'll continue to release greater capacities on the march to that 500 terabyte capacity. And we've done this since 1953, when tape was invented. And here's the other thing. The 580 terabyte cartridge, it's just a stepping stone. It's like, oh, we get to 580 and then we saturate like disk is. No, it's a stepping stone. We've got plenty of space and room to shrink the bit.
Ace, you mentioned that whole conversation becomes super interesting. Let's take an aside here for a second, because there's the medium that is tape, and there is writing to tape and all of its advantages from a cost perspective, a security perspective, a longevity perspective, etc. I hear folks start talking about putting a petabyte, even if you're a small to medium business, putting 20 terabytes on a tape. Maybe my business isn't that big, right? Or at least it's not 580 terabytes big. I'm not going to keep that cartridge, because part of what we talked about is air gapping. I'm not going to keep that cartridge in the library and just continue to write to it until it's full. I got to think about the architecture of my environment to be able to take the best advantage of using that tape, but also giving myself that air gapping capability and the rotation and that sort of thing. Any words of wisdom when it comes to thinking about the architecture of architecting my tape solution, given what we know about the capacities of tape?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as the growth in capacity over time, one thing that people underestimate is how much their business will grow. You know, um, we were talking with a hyperscaler whose model is shifting a bit from photos to videos that they will save. And so that, they woke up to, oh, well, wait a minute, it's not just temporary data, it's now permanent data, and it's not just photos, it's videos. But if each company kind of looks at their history, I think what they would find is that they might be underestimating their data growth. I mean, I was the business manager for introducing the first 1 gigabyte disk drive. It was Digital Equipment Corporation, RF-72. And this is a little bit anecdotal, but the engineering team came to me and said, 1 gigabyte, 5.25 inch, it was a fairly sizable piece of equipment. And they said, are we going to need a 2 gigabyte drive? Let me think about that. So I went off for a week and I came back and I said, nobody will ever put that much data on a single drive, right? On a single spindle. And now we have, drives that are terabytes. And it really is just a reflection of we need to understand that data will grow and it'll probably surpass our expectations. So the thing is about tape, if your cartridges continue to grow, yeah, your business is going to be on fewer and fewer cartridges. Now, one of the interesting dynamics is, like, take our mid-sized library. It's called the TS4300. Fits in a rack, and that's been considered a fairly middle of the road type of library. It's not the big one, and it's not a tabletop, but what we're finding is that as capacities get bigger, that's a very affordable solution, and it packs petabytes of data. And as cartridges continue to double in capacity, and then we get from 20 terabytes to 580, we will see that library can pack a sufficient amount of capacity data in a footprint, that's just in a rack. So I think, the best way is to kind of look out over the next year or two what your capacity is today, what your growth rate is, and then add a little on top of that because you're probably underestimating, and then get something that you can use now and grow, non-disruptively going forward.
Great. Thanks. We got a few more minutes here. I want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Ace and I will do our best to get to them and answer them. Ace, so as we see if anyone drops anything in, maybe another question for you. We've done a lot of comparison of tape to disk, but as the cloud becomes more ubiquitous and the promise of cheap storage, so to speak, right? And we can talk about this, I have a feeling. How should people think about this comparison between tape and cloud these days? Or is that a logic? Is that a thing?
Well, that's a really good question because a lot of clients have said, well, I'm just going to put my stuff in the cloud, and then it's safe out there and somebody else will be responsible for it. Before COVID, when you and I, Steve, used to go to shows and places and speak to clients, I was at Oracle World, that was 2 years ago, maybe before the COVID hit. And I took a stroll over to the booth of a well-known public provider, and I guess they thought I was an end user. So they enthusiastically, spoke to me about all their storage services. But when they talked about the tiered storage service, the one that takes you 4, 12, 48 hours to get your data back from, I said, is that on tape? And their response was, well, why does that matter to you, right? We're just selling you, for a price. We're selling you access, and here are the SLAs in that. Now, I know that they use tape for that service, but few people can wait for hours, to get their data back. Now, maybe some, can wait 12 hours or 48 hours or whatever it would be for them, but not many that I know. So we know that cloud providers have embraced tape, and we also know that it's out there, and there's a service for it, and there's an SLA around it. Now, when people ask me, but is it safe out there? Here's what I say. The beauty of the cloud is that it's always on. And the risk of the public cloud is that it's always on. The thing that makes it great, and you can get your access from any data, access to your data from anywhere in the world, that's great. It's always on. And the risk that it's always on is that there is a connection to your data somewhere in the world. And so bad actors can be very, very creative. They're like the Wile E. Coyote, chasing the Roadrunner. Always got a kind of rocket shoes, or, they got some creative thing to, catch that bird. But because the Roadrunner is usually on the other side of the cliff, and, Wile E. Coyote is on this side, there's an air gap, and he usually ends up in a puff of dust at the bottom of the canyon. You don't know if you store your data in the cloud. You really don't know if it's connected or not. And I often cite the Capital One breach that occurred a few years ago. It was stored, according to the Wall Street Journal, on AWS cloud. And it was a bad actor, but it wasn't somebody from the outside. It was a disgruntled employee, who went in and breached that data. And so then the question was, did Capital One, not the cloud provider, but did Capital One take all the appropriate security measures? And it sort of became obvious, I think, there's a kind of a misconcept out there about the cloud. If I put my data in the cloud, they're responsible for it. Well, no, actually, when it comes to the security of your client's data, you're responsible for it. You have to run all the tests. You have to make sure that you can recover it and so on, even if it's out in the cloud. So And there's an appendix out there called Appendix J of the FFEIC. Google that, and it talks about tape as an air gap and so on. And I recommend that. So with tape, even if you use a public cloud, you can ensure that you have a golden copy, a true air gap copy in your locked closet or in a mountain or at grandma's house, whether there's a disgruntled employee at the cloud provider or even in your own company. So having copies of your data stored offline is critical at a time when cyber threats are a constant presence.
So thanks for that, Ace. I've got a couple more thoughts to that, but we actually had an interesting question come in from one of our customers or one of our listeners, right? And the question says, I'm a small business using Azure Cloud. I'm looking at using Veeam and an on-premise tape like IBM to do my backups. What setup should I be thinking about? And also, this helps lower our cyber insurance costs and risk. And I only have about 20 terabytes of data. So, small environment like that, what type of recommendation would you lend to them?
Well, I would ask what are the growth? If they only have 20 terabytes, I think again, there's no one answer to this. You kind of have to say, okay, what do I need to do to protect my 20 terabytes? But you could have a small library or even a desktop unit to make sure you have a golden copy with you or in the trunk of your car at grandma's house or in a locked closet.
Do you have a couple model numbers, Ace, that this person could just think about when you said small library or desktop model?
Yeah, the TS2900 is the IBM desktop. And then I say beyond that, you have the TS4300, which is the one I kind of mentioned before, which you can have just a single rack with, one or two drives, and you just put that in a rack. Just that one unit. You can have several cartridges in it, and then you can expand that as your business grows over time. So, it depends. If you have a rack that you could put in a TS4300, a starter, that's a good way to do it. If you don't, there's a desktop unit. But I also try to emphasize that we're not saying don't store in the cloud. In fact, if you're a small mom and pop shop, that may be a good thing for you to do, store it up in the cloud. But with a very, very low cost of entry, if you're not using tape, you could just have that golden copy also, in your hands.
So, Ace, we're close to the end here. I do have a couple other thoughts, but I thought what might be kind of fun is why don't we play a quick game here, which I think can help us, right? So, true or false, Ace, you being the expert, right? Tape may be fine for one element of a multi-threaded data protection scheme, but restoring from tape is too slow to be practical when my main data center is down. Would you say that's true or false?
I would say that's a trick question. Did you come up with that one, Steve?
All night. I've been thinking about it all night.
It's a classic puzzle, right? And the classic answer is you could have architected environment where maybe your backup doesn't come back as quickly as you need it. But here's the thing. I say classic answer is it depends, But tape solutions can be architected to back up in a reasonable time. And we and our BPs can take the time to figure out what are your RTO and RPO times and what is the tape library that you would need to bring that back in a reasonable time. Now, you might have sent your tapes off to an Iron Mountain, and that would take a little longer than if you kept them on campus someplace to get to the offline cartridges. But you don't even really need to go to an Iron Mountain. Most of our tape libraries today, you could even have another tape library on campus or in some other location and just copy, one volume to the other. And it's backed up over there, right? So if one site goes down, you switch over and you start pulling from that backup. So there are ways to architect a backup and a restore that really don't have to take that long. And if you got the right number of drives and the right combination, you can get it back fairly quick. And you can always keep another copy in Iron Mountain if you wanted to maybe protect against a real disaster of some sort. But yeah, there's ways to architect solutions where it's not going to prevent you from getting back in time.
Well, and like I was saying, maybe we wrap up with this, right? Is the one of the best things to think about when architecting a backup solution, and it might sound a little crazy, but we talk about the 3-2-1-1 methodology, right? 3 copies of your data, 2 types of media, 1 copy offline, and 1 copy offsite. Spectrum Protect recently had an announcement where they actually are able to write multiple streams to multiple devices in the backup. So we call it the multi-site replication and the multi-site storage for exactly this type of purpose. But at the end of the day, and I highly encourage folks to look at the 2021 Cost of a Data Breach report by Ponymon and the IBM security team. If you Google it, it's on IBM's website. Great report, talks about some of the different ways infiltration happens. And if you're looking at tape as a security component, I think this lends itself to some great information. But one of the key things they mention is a cyber threat, whatever that is, before it becomes ransomware or malware or exposes your data, right, can live in your data center for over 200 days. Now, in that best practice around let's have 3 copies of my data, right, and that sort of thing. You're going to take a snapshot. You might have a streaming copy of that information, but you're not going to keep that data around for longer periods of time. But tape is a great place to keep information around for long periods of time due to its lower cost and longevity, right? So the only clean copy of your data that you might have that's 200 days old might only live on tape. So you might have a business RTO that says, hey, I need that data back in 2 hours. But at the end of the day, the key to that statement is you need the data back, right? If you can't get it in 2 hours because it's been compromised, and the only place you can get it is from tape, well, I guess that meets your recovery time because you got to have the data, right? So you need that information.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to add on that if I might, if we still have time.
Yep.
I've in talking with clients, I see an emerging paradigm, which I think is interesting and it's brilliant in its simplicity. And we were talking with one that really just kind of laid it out for me. So they back up to tape, right? And they have copies on tape, and it's like you said, right? You don't know if file that's the offending file, the infected file is out there. So what they do is they said, look, here's our policy. If we get attacked, we're going to simply wipe off our entire production system because we don't know what might have started the infection. We're going to rebuild it from the ground up. It's going to be clean, no infection. And then we will restore critical files and we'll bring them over into a sandbox and we'll run them through and make sure they weren't the offending file. So we'll get the critical ones back, but we won't restore the entire, database or the entire file, because what they'll do at that point is say, going forward, if you need a file, we'll restore that one. That file will come into the sandbox and we'll clean it up, make sure it's not offending, and then we'll restore it. So little extra steps there, but it's not about, oh, I got attacked, I got to go restore everything back. That's going to take a long time. People are thinking of very creative ways to restore in an optimized way.
Very good. So with that, Ace, first I want to thank you very much for your expertise. I always enjoy listening to your knowledge around tape and that sort of thing. So maybe turn it back to Mark, Ryan, and Kira. Any further questions or thoughts before we close this out?
Oh, I thought it was really great, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think everybody did. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.